the hound had killed a man in this very courtyard, and the girl on her knees in the wet gravel did not appear to know it, or did not care, because she was holding its enormous gray head in both of her small hands and telling it, in a low, conspiratorial voice, that it had the saddest eyebrows she had ever seen on anything living. The rain had stopped an hour ago. The stones still smelled of it. Somewhere behind her, a groom was frozen mid-step with a bucket in his hand, and beyond him, the stable master had gone the particular color of a man who has just remembered a prayer he had not said since childhood. None of this reached her. She had come around the corner of the west wing, looking for a place to sit out of the wind, had seen a dog, and had done what she always did with dogs, which was to fold down onto her heels and offer the flat of her palm as if she were meeting a small, polite acquaintance at a fair. The hound, whose name in the household ledgers was written only as Bran, and whose name in the mouths of the servants was not spoken at all if it could be avoided, had walked over to her on legs the length of a child's arms, had lowered its head into her cupped hands, and had, after a long, unreadable moment, done a thing that no one in the household had ever seen it do. It had wagged its tail. Once, twice, then in an uncertain rhythm, as if the muscle had been asked to remember a word in a language it had forgotten. She laughed. It was not a loud laugh. It was the small, private laugh of a person who has just been handed a secret. She pressed her forehead to the wide, flat plate of the hound's skull and told it that it was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, and that anyone who had told it otherwise had been mistaken. Above her, on the narrow stone gallery that ran along the second floor of the East Range, a man stood with one gloved hand resting on the balustrade and did not move. He had come out to see what the shouting was about. There had been no shouting, only a silence with a particular shape to it, the shape a household makes when everyone in it is waiting to see whether they will need to run. He had followed that silence out to the gallery, expecting to have to give an order he did not enjoy giving. Instead, he had found a girl he had never seen before, with her hands full of a dog he had bought precisely because it would not permit hands. His first thought was uncharitable and practical, which was that whoever had let her in would answer for it. His second thought, which arrived more slowly and which he did not entirely trust, was that he had never in his life seen the animal look content. He let the second thought sit where it was. He did not move. He had learned, from a childhood spent in rooms where every gesture was measured, that a person could learn a great deal by being still, and that the moment you stepped into a scene, you changed it, and sometimes the thing you wanted most to understand was the version of the scene that existed only when you were not in it. So he watched. She was perhaps 20. She was wearing a traveling cloak the color of wet bark, and the hem of it was heavy with mud and pulled sideways as she knelt, and one of her braids had come loose and hung along her cheek in a way she had clearly forgotten. There was a smudge of something on her jaw. She was speaking to the hound in a low, continuous murmur, and every so often the hound leaned into her a little more heavily until she was half holding it up, which was absurd, because the hound outweighed her by a good measure and could have knocked her flat with a shrug. She did not seem to consider this. She had the calm of someone who had never been bitten by a thing she loved. He wondered, with a small, unpleasant clarity, when the last time was that he himself had knelt in gravel for the sake of anything. He put the thought away. He had come out here to be a duke, not to be a man taking stock. Below, the stable master had recovered enough to take one step forward, and the girl, without lifting her head, said, quite mildly, that if he came any closer, the dog would not like it. And could he please stay where he was for another moment while she finished saying hello? The stable master stopped. The stable master had been a soldier for 20 years and had faced down a great many things in his time, and it did not once occur to him to disobey. She scratched the hound behind the ears in the particular place that only dogs know about, and the hound closed its eyes, and the tail moved again, and the man on the gallery, who had been ready an instant before to call down and put an end to all of this, found that he did not want to be the one who made the tail stop. He had, for the space of a breath, the disorienting sense that he was intruding in his own courtyard. He set the sensation aside for later examination, as he set most sensations. He said in a voice pitched to carry without seeming to try, that whoever was responsible for the young lady should come and collect her, since the yard was not a suitable place for a guest to be kneeling in the wet. The girl looked up. She did not startle. That was the first thing he noticed. The second thing he noticed was that her eyes were the color of weak tea and had, at the corners, the faint, tired lines of a person who read too late by not enough candle. The third thing he noticed was that she had recognized him, and that the recognition had not made her afraid, only careful, in the way a person is careful with a full cup. She did not stand at once. She finished what she was saying to the hound. Then she rose, brushing the gravel from her knees with the absent competence of someone who had knelt in a great many yards, and she inclined her head to him in a small, precise bow that was neither servile nor showy, and she said that she was very sorry to have caused a stir, that she had not known the dog was not to be approached, and that she would go inside at once if he wished it. She did not offer her name. She did not offer an explanation. She waited. He came down the stairs. He did not hurry. By the time he reached the courtyard, the stablemaster had melted backwards through a doorway, and the groom had discovered urgent business with a bucket, and there were only the three of them left, which was to say, the girl, the hound, and himself. And he was not entirely sure which of the three was most out of place. Up close, she was smaller than she had looked from above, and steadier than she had any right to be. The hound, seeing him, did not growl. This was not in itself remarkable. The hound had never growled at him. What was remarkable was that the hound did not move away from her side, and that when he put out one gloved hand in the automatic gesture of ownership, the animal glanced up at the girl first, as if checking, before it accepted the touch. He noted the glance. He filed it. He asked her, courteously, how she had come to be in his courtyard. She said that she had come with the coach that had arrived that morning from the south, and that she was to be one of the parties staying for the fortnight, and that her name was Inez Vero, and that she was the companion to Lady Halbrook, who had insisted on bringing her, and who was at this moment inside being fussed over by the housekeeper. She said this without embellishment. She did not say why Lady Halbrook had insisted. She did not say what a companion did. She let the plain fact of the arrangement stand between them like a table with nothing on it. He said that he understood, and that she was welcome, and that she should perhaps go in and change out of the wet cloak. She said that she would. Neither of them moved. The hound sat down, heavily, on her foot. She winced, then laughed, then bent to work her foot free with the air of a person who had done this many times before with many other dogs and had long since given up expecting dignity to survive the encounter. The Duke watched her laugh. He watched her extract her foot. He watched her scratch the hound one last time along the great gray slope of its jaw and murmur something to it that he could not hear. And the hound, that had killed a man in this very courtyard, closed its eyes again, and leaned. Inez Vero straightened, adjusted her cloak, inclined her head to him a second time with the same small precision, and walked past him toward the door of the East Range, and did not look back. He stood in the wet gravel for longer than he meant to. The hound stayed where she had left it, ears still pricked in the direction she had gone, tail still moving in that uncertain new rhythm, as if it were practicing. He looked down at the animal. He said, quietly, so that only the two of them could hear, that this was going to be inconvenient. The hound did not disagree. It rarely did. Inside, the house was doing what the house always did when guests arrived, which was to pretend that nothing had changed while everything had. Doors that were usually left ajar were closed. Silver that lived in cupboards was on tables. The long gallery had been swept twice in a day and was now being surveyed by the housekeeper with the expression of a general who suspects her troops of hiding under the furniture. Inez walked through all of this with her head down and her cloak dripping in small, polite intervals onto the flagstones, and no one stopped her, because she had the particular gift of moving through a house as if she had a place to be, whether or not she did. She found Lady Halbrook in the blue room, sitting very upright in a chair that was too tall for her, being told by the housekeeper about the arrangement of the meals. Lady Halbrook was 72 and had the face of a woman who had once been beautiful and had decided on the whole that the trade of beauty for opinions had been a good one. She glanced up as Inez came in, took in the cloak, the mud, the loose braid, and said without preamble that she trusted Inez had not disgraced them within the first hour. Inez said that she had not, that she had only met a dog. Lady Halbrook said that this was the sort of thing Inez would say, and would Inez please go and change because she looked like a drowned rabbit and it was undignified. Inez said that she would. She did not mention which dog. She did not mention the man on the gallery. She had learned, over 3 years in Lady Halbrook's service, that information given too early was information given away, and that certain things were best kept for the moment they became useful. In her small room above the kitchens, which had been given to her because she was not a proper guest, but was not quite a servant either, she peeled off the wet cloak and hung it over the back of the single chair, and stood for a moment with her hands pressed flat to the top of the washstand. She was tired. She had been tired for a long time, in the particular way that comes of always being awake for other people. The room had a window the size of a book and a fireplace the size of a shoe, and someone had lit a small fire in it, which was a kindness she had not expected. She noticed the kindness. She stored it. She thought about the dog. She thought about the man. She had known, from the first breath she took in the courtyard, that the dog was the Duke's, because a dog like that belonged to no one else in a place like this. And she had known, from the way the yard had gone still, that she was doing something she was not supposed to do. She had done it anyway, because the dog had looked at her, and there had been in its look the specific, bewildered patience of an animal that had been feared for so long it had begun to suspect the fear was its own fault. She knew that look. She had worn it, in a manner of speaking, for most of her life. She had not intended to be noticed by the Duke. She had certainly not intended to be looked at by him with the particular attention he had used, which was the attention of a man cataloging an anomaly. She did not want to be an anomaly. Anomalies were remembered. She had come here to not be remembered. She had come here because Lady Halbrook, who had a great many opinions and a somewhat smaller number of relatives, had received an invitation to a house party at the Duke of Corvain's country seat, and had informed Inez that they were going, and that Inez was to make herself useful and invisible for a fortnight, after which they would return to the small, damp town where Lady Halbrook kept house, and Inez kept the ledgers. Inez had said that she would. She was very good at being useful. She was better still at being invisible. She had, in the last 3 years, become almost supernaturally difficult to see, which was a skill she had acquired for reasons she did not choose to examine too closely, and which had been, until this afternoon, entirely intact. She looked at herself in the small clouded mirror above the washstand. Her hair was in disarray. there was still a smudge on her jaw. Her eyes were the color of weak tea and had the faint tired lines at the corners that came of reading too late by not enough candle. And she was aware, for the first time in a long while, that she had a face, and that the face had been seen. She scrubbed the smudge off with the corner of a damp cloth. She rebraided her hair. She put on the plain gray dress that Lady Helbrook considered appropriate for a companion in a great house. And she went downstairs to be useful, and she did not think about the dog. She thought instead about the ledger in the bottom of her trunk. She had brought it with her because she brought it everywhere. It was a thin book, bound in green cloth, and its pages were filled with columns of numbers in her own small, neat hand. The numbers belonged to a set of accounts that were not Lady Holbrook's, and were not, strictly speaking, hers either, and which she had been keeping in secret for 11 months, because someone had to, and no one else had noticed that they needed keeping. The ledger was the reason she had not wanted to be noticed. The ledger was the reason she carried it with her instead of leaving it behind. The ledger was, in a manner of speaking, the shape of her life at present. She had not intended to open it in the Duke's house. She had intended to sit quietly in Lady Holbrook's shadow for a fortnight and go home. She had intended a great many things. She thought of the hound's tail, moving in its uncertain new rhythm, as if the muscle had been asked to remember a word in a language it had forgotten. She thought of the way the Duke had said, quietly, that this was going to be inconvenient. She had a suspicion, which she did not enjoy, that he had not been talking to the dog. Dinner that evening was long and hot, and lit by more candles than Inez had ever seen in one room in her life, and she sat near the far end of the long table between an elderly gentleman who was deaf in his left ear and a young woman who had decided within the first course that Inez was not worth speaking to, and Inez was grateful for both of them. The Duke sat at the head of the table. He did not look at her. He looked at her once, at the beginning, in the small, polite sweep with which a host takes account of the room, and after that he did not look at her again, and she understood, with the professional appreciation of one careful person for another, that he was being deliberate. A person who does not look at you on purpose is a person who has decided to think about you later. She ate her soup. She listened to the deaf gentleman's opinions about the road from the south, which were extensive. She agreed with him on all counts, in the raised voice one used for his good ear, and she watched the room out of the corner of her eye in the way she had learned to watch rooms. The Duke of Corvain, as she now understood him to be, was perhaps 35, and had the still face of a man who had learned young that his face was a document other people read. He was courteous to the woman on his right, who was the sister of a marquis, and who laughed at everything he said in a bright, glassy way that suggested she had been told to. He was courteous to the man on his left, who was some kind of cousin and who spoke very slowly, as if each sentence were an object he was setting down on a shelf. He was courteous to the footman. He was, Inez noticed, courteous to everyone in exactly the same measured degree, which was itself a form of privacy. He did not eat very much. He drank less. He had, at one point, in the middle of some story the Marquess's sister was telling about a horse, the smallest flicker of a smile, and Inez looked away at once, because she did not want to be caught cataloguing him the way he had cataloguing her. Lady Helbrook, halfway down the table, was in fine form. Lady Helbrook was always in fine form at other people's dinners. She was telling the woman beside her about the iniquities of a certain magistrate in their home county, and the woman was nodding in the pained way of a person who had not asked and could not escape. Inez, who had heard the story about the magistrate 140 times by rough count, did not need to listen to know when to laugh, and did so at the correct interval, which pleased Lady Helbrook, who liked to feel that her audience was attentive even when it was not present. Between the fish and the mutton, a footman came in and murmured something in the Duke's ear. The Duke inclined his head. The footman withdrew. Nothing changed on the Duke's face. But Inez, who had spent 3 years watching a difficult old woman for the small signs of impending weather, saw the very slight tightening at the corner of his mouth and understood that whatever had been murmured had not been welcome. She wondered what it was. She reminded herself, at once and firmly, that it was not her business. She had a great many things that were not her business. She was cultivating a garden of things that were not her business, and it was, on the whole, a large garden. After the mutton there was a pudding, and after the pudding the ladies withdrew, and Inez withdrew with them, because that was where a companion belonged, and she sat in a corner of the drawing room with her hands folded in her lap, and watched the Marquess's sister play the pianoforte with a great deal of feeling, and not quite enough accuracy. And she thought about the ledger, and she thought about the hound, and she thought, against her will, about the man at the head of the table, who had not looked at her twice. She was still thinking about him when the gentleman came in, and she was still thinking about him when Lady Halbrook, from across the room, caught her eye and made the small, imperious gesture that meant fetch. And she rose and crossed the room to fetch, and the Duke, on his way to the fireplace, passed within a foot of her and did not look at her, and she felt, quite clearly, the deliberate weight of his not looking. She fetched Lady Halbrook's shawl. She brought it back. She arranged it around the old woman's shoulders. She returned to her corner. The evening ended, as evenings in such houses end, with a gradual thinning of the room, and Inez was one of the first to slip out, because a companion was permitted to be tired before her lady was, provided she was quiet about it. In the corridor outside the drawing room, a footman was extinguishing candles one by one with a long brass snuffer, and the light in the passage was narrowing as she walked through it, and at the far end of the passage, where it turned toward the stairs, a shape was waiting. It was the hound. It was sitting square on its haunches, with its great head up and its ears forward, and it was looking at her, and when she came within reach it stood, and it walked, without haste, at her side, all the way up the stairs and along the upper corridor to the door of her small room above the kitchens. And there it sat down again and looked at her expectantly, as if she had made an appointment with it that she had forgotten. She stood in the doorway with her hand on the latch. She looked down at the hound. The hound looked up at her. Its tail, once, twice, then in that uncertain rhythm moved against the floorboards. She said in a low voice that this was very kind of it, and that she was flattered, and that it could not come in because the room was too small, and it was too large, and there was no arrangement in which they would both fit. The hound considered this. The hound lay down across the threshold. She sighed. She stepped over it. She closed the door behind her, gently, so as not to catch its tail. She stood in the middle of her small room and pressed her hands to her face. She was not, as a rule, a person who allowed herself to be moved by animals. She had known too many. She knew what they cost. She knew that a creature that chose you did not know it was choosing you, only that it had decided you smelled of something safe, and that this was not the same as being loved, though it was, in its way, harder to bear. She sat down on the edge of the narrow bed. She listened. The hound on the far side of the door sighed once, deeply, and settled. Somewhere in the great house below, a clock struck the hour. She counted the strikes. There were 11. She had, in her head, the beginnings of a suspicion that she would sleep, tonight, better than she had slept in months, and that this too was going to be inconvenient, because she had come here to not be noticed, and she was being, quietly and steadily and against her will, noticed by a dog, and she was beginning to suspect, by its master. The Duke, in his study on the other side of the house, was doing what he did when he could not sleep. which was to work. His desk was a long slab of walnut that had belonged to his grandfather and bore the burn marks of 3 generations of impatient candles. And on it, at present, were spread the letters that had come in that afternoon, and the ledger of the North Estates, and a small ivory-handled knife he used for opening seals. And, at the far edge, the note that had been murmured to him at dinner, and which he had had a footman bring up on a tray afterwards. The note was short. It said that the man he had been expecting from the city had arrived, that the man had been given a room in the West Wing, and that the man had asked, with unnecessary politeness, whether His Grace would receive him in the morning. The Duke read the note twice. He set it aside. He picked up the ledger of the North Estates and did not open it. He was, he acknowledged to himself, with the faint distaste he reserved for his own weaknesses, distracted. He was distracted by a small woman in a gray dress who had not looked at him at dinner. He was distracted by the memory of a tale moving in an uncertain rhythm. He was distracted most of all by the fact that when he had come back into the house after the courtyard, he had gone straight to the steward and had asked, with the offhandedness that always meant he was serious, who Lady Halbrook's companion was. And the steward, who had known him since he was a boy in short trousers, had looked at him for a beat too long before answering. The steward had said that the companion was one Inez Verot, born in the town of Merrifield in the West, orphaned at 15, in Lady Halbrook's employ for 3 years. Quiet, honest, and, as far as the steward had been able to determine on short notice, entirely unremarkable. The Duke had thanked the steward. He had not said what he was thinking, which was that a person who was entirely unremarkable did not calm a killing dog by mealing in gravel and calling it ridiculous. He put the ledger down. He rose. He crossed to the window and stood looking out at the courtyard, which was silver now with a thin moon, and he thought, with the deliberate care he brought to unwelcome ideas, about what it was that he had actually seen that afternoon. He had seen a young woman who was not afraid of a thing that ought to have frightened her. He had seen an animal that had chosen her within a minute. He had seen, and this was the part he trusted least, a person who had spoken to a stablemaster as if she had a right to, and had been obeyed. There was a habit of authority in her that did not match the gray dress. He knew authority when he saw it. He had been trained in it since he could stand. It could be counterfeited by the ambitious, but the counterfeit had a shine to it, and hers had none. Hers was the plain, matte finish of a thing that had been used. He thought about the note from the city. He thought about the man in the West Wing. He thought about the reason he had invited a house party at all, which was not, as his aunt believed, because he had at last decided to consider marriage, but because he needed a great many people in his house at once in order to hide, within their number, one particular person whose visit could not, for reasons of state and family, be seen to be a visit. The party was a screen. The screen was working. The screen had, this afternoon, developed an unexpected figure in its foreground, and he did not yet know whether the figure was decorative, or whether it was, in some manner he had not yet identified, load-bearing. He returned to his desk. He sat. He drew a fresh sheet of paper toward him and, in the small, precise hand he used for his private notes, he wrote a single line. He wrote, "Watch her." He looked at the line for a moment. He crossed it out. He wrote instead, "Do not watch her too closely." He looked at that line for longer. He folded the paper. He put it in the drawer that locked. He went to bed and did not sleep, and rose before the household did, and went out into the courtyard in the gray hour, and found the hound already there, sitting square on its haunches on the wet stones, staring up at a window on the second floor of the East Range, and the Duke, following its gaze, identified the window as belonging to the small room above the kitchens where he had ordered, without quite examining his reasons, that Lady Halbrook's companion be lodged. He stood beside the hound. The hound did not look at him. They stayed like that for some minutes, the man and the animal, watching a window in which no light showed, and behind which, presumably, a young woman was asleep. At length the Duke said, in the same low voice he had used the day before, that this was going to be very inconvenient indeed. The hound, in agreement, did not disagree. Breakfast in a great house is a slow event. Guests drift in when they please, are served what they ask for, and are permitted the small mercy of not being required to speak until they have taken tea. Inez came down early, because she always came down early, and found only 2 people in the breakfast room. The deaf gentleman from the night before, who was reading a newspaper at arm's length and eating toast with the grim patience of a man who did not trust it, and the Duke, who was standing by the sideboard with a cup in his hand, and who turned when she came in and looked at her, properly and directly, for the first time since the courtyard. She stopped in the doorway. She had not expected him. She had planned to eat quickly and go and see whether Lady Halbrook required anything, and then find a corner of the library in which to be invisible. And this plan did not include being looked at by the master of the house across an empty room in the early light. He inclined his head. He said good morning. He said it as one says such things, without weight. And she said good morning back. And she went to the sideboard, and she took a plate, and she put on it a piece of bread and a small pear, because those were the things she could manage while being looked at. And she sat down at the far end of the long table, where she had sat the night before, and she began, calmly, to eat. He remained by the sideboard. He did not sit. He said after a moment that she had made an unusual friend. She glanced up. She said that the hound had been outside her door all night. She said it as one reports the weather. She said also that she had stepped over the hound to leave her room that morning, and that the hound had escorted her down the back stairs, and had only been persuaded to remain in the kitchen by the offer of a piece of bacon, which the cook had provided with the expression of a person witnessing a small local miracle. The Duke did not smile. His mouth, however, altered in the same faint way it had altered at dinner, and Inez, who was a professional observer of faint alterations, noted it. He said that the hound was not, in general, susceptible to bacon. She said that, in her experience, most things were, given time and patience. He said, with the same small alteration of the mouth, that he was beginning to see her point. He crossed the room. He did not sit at the head of the table, which was a courtesy. He sat at the corner, 3 chairs from her, which was another courtesy, and further, that placed him within conversational distance without requiring her to raise her voice. The deaf gentleman, who had missed all of this, turned a page of his newspaper. The Duke asked her, in the manner of a man making conversation, how long she had been with Lady Halbrook. She said 3 years. He asked her where she had lived before. She said in Merryfield, in the West, with an aunt who had since died. He said that he had passed through Merryfield once, years ago. She said that she was sorry to hear it. He looked at her. She looked back. She permitted herself, for the first time in some hours, a very small smile, which was the smile of a person who has made a joke and knows she has been understood. He said, gravely, that Merryfield had been better than expected and worse than deserved, and that he had left with a good horse and a bad opinion. She said that this was the correct order in which to leave Merryfield. He asked her, after a pause, whether she was happy in Lady Halbrook's employ. She looked at him for a long moment. She said that she was fortunate in Lady Halbrook, who was kinder than she pretended to be, and that she considered fortune and happiness to be different animals and preferred to keep them in separate stalls. He set his cup down. He looked at her with an attention she did not enjoy. He said that this was a considered answer. She said that she considered most of her answers because she did not have very many of them and had to make them last. He said, quietly, that he had known men in the diplomatic service who could not have done as well. She did not reply. She ate her pear. She was aware that she had said too much, or rather that she had said too well, and that the man 3 chairs down was looking at her with the specific attention of a man cataloging an anomaly, which was the attention she had come here to avoid. She resolved, silently, to be duller. She would fail at this, and she knew it, but the resolution comforted her. He asked her, changing his approach with the smoothness of a man who had done this often, whether she read. She said that she did. He asked her what. She said whatever came to hand, which was true, and history, when she could get it, which was truer, and letters, when she could not get history, because letters were history in a smaller room. He said that his library was open to her. She said that this was very kind and that she would try not to disgrace it. He said that he did not think that she would. He rose. He said that he had matters to attend to before the household woke fully, and he bowed to her with the same small precision she had used to him the day before, and he left the room. She sat for a moment with the pear in her hand. She was aware, in the wake of him, of a feeling she had not felt in a long time, and which she disliked, and which she recognized. It was the feeling of having been seen. She finished the pear. She rose. She went to find Lady Halbrook. She did not go to the library. She went to the library the next day. She had by then invented a reason. The library was in the south wing, and had windows the height of 2 men, and shelves the height of 3, and a ladder on a rail, and a smell of old paper and beeswax that made Inez, the first time she stepped into it, briefly forget why she had come. She stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame, and permitted herself the small private greed of a person who had always had to borrow. Then she went in, and she found what she had told herself she had come to find, which was a history of the county, because Lady Halbrook had expressed at breakfast a passing curiosity about a battle that had once been fought nearby, and Inez had offered to look it up, and Lady Halbrook had made the small, imperious gesture that meant yes. This was Inez's excuse. Her real reason was less easy to name, and she preferred not to name it. She found the history on the 3rd shelf of the 2nd bay. She took it down. She sat with it in the deep window seat that looked out over the west lawn, and she opened it, and she began to read. And she was, within a quarter of an hour, entirely absent from the room. The hound found her there. It came in on its huge silent paws, and it lay down at her feet with a sigh that shook the floorboards. And she reached down without looking and rested her hand on the flat plate of its skull. And it closed its eyes, and the 2 of them were, for a while, a small tableau of contentment in a corner of a great house. The Duke found her there as well. He did not intend to. He had come into the library for a book on drainage, which was the truth, and he had seen, from the door, a small gray figure and a large gray figure in the window seat, and he had, for the first time in as long as he could remember, forgotten what he had come in for. He recovered. He crossed to the shelf where the book on drainage lived. He took it down. He did not open it. He said, without turning, that he hoped she had found what she was looking for. She said that she had. She said that she was reading about a battle. He asked which. She named it. He came over. He sat down on the other end of the window seat, which was long enough to permit this without impropriety, and he asked her what she thought of the account. She said that the account was written by a man who had not been at the battle and who disliked the losing side, and that she preferred the version that had been written by a woman in a nearby village, who had watched the smoke from her roof and had counted the wagons that came back and the wagons that did not. He looked at her. He said that she had read the woman's account. She said that she had, once, in a bound volume of letters that had belonged to her aunt. He said that he had not known the woman's account existed. She said that most people did not, which was why she preferred it. He said, after a moment, that he would be interested to read it if she could remember the volume. She said that she could. She named the volume and the printer and the year in the small, precise way she named numbers, and he wrote them down in a small notebook he carried in his coat, and he did not comment on how she had produced the details, because he understood, by now, that comment would drive her back into the gray dress, and he did not want her to go back into the gray dress just yet. They talked. They talked about the battle, and then about the county, and then about roads, and then about the price of grain, and then about a book he had read once as a boy and had not been able to find since, which she said she thought she had seen in a second-hand shop in a town whose name she gave, and he wrote that down too. They did not talk about themselves. They did not talk about the hound, which lay between them with its chin on her foot and its eyes closed. They did not talk about the fact that she was a companion and he was a duke, and that this conversation, in the strictest reading of the rules by which they both lived, should not have been happening. They talked as two careful people talk when they have found, unexpectedly, another careful person, and are both of them a little relieved and a little alarmed. At length, she closed the book. She said that she should go, that Lady Helbrook would want her. He said that he understood. She rose. The hound rose with her. She looked down at the hound and then at him, and she said, with the small smile she had permitted herself at breakfast, that she was afraid she had stolen his dog. He said that the dog had not, in his experience, been stealable, and that if she had managed it, he would not know how to complain. She said that she would return it when she left. He did not answer at once. He said, after a moment, that they would see. She left the library. The hound went with her as far as the door, and then, at a low word from him that Inez did not hear, it turned and came back, and sat at his feet, and looked up at him with the patient, bewildered patience of an animal that had been asked to do a difficult thing. He rested his hand on its head. He said quietly, in the voice he used only for the animal and, he was beginning to suspect, for one other person, that he was sorry. The hound, in acceptance, did not disagree. The fortnight, which had been intended to be a screen, began to develop, from the Duke's point of view, an inconvenient number of unscripted scenes. There was, for example, the morning when a child from the village came up to the house with a message for the housekeeper and, on being told to wait in the servants' hall, was found half an hour later in the courtyard with the hound, holding one of its paws in her lap and telling it, in a very serious voice, that it needed to be brave because she was going to look at a thorn. The child was 7. The hound was, in the accounting of the household, still a killing dog. The Duke, alerted by a footman with a face like a sheet, came out onto the gallery to observe the scene, and found, on the far side of the courtyard, Inez Farreau standing quietly against a pillar, with her hands folded in front of her, and an expression of calm attention on her face. And he understood, without being told, that she had put herself there in case she was needed, and had chosen not to interfere unless she was. The child got the thorn out. The hound licked her face, once, gravely. The child said thank you and ran off toward the kitchens for a biscuit. Inez, seeing that the crisis had resolved itself, inclined her head to the Duke on the gallery and went back inside, and did not at any point appear to require praise for her part. He watched her go. He noted, and did not enjoy noting, that she had known he was there the whole time. There was, for example, the evening when Lady Helbrook, who had drunk more wine at dinner than was strictly wise for her, held forth at length in the drawing room about the state of the roads in the south of the county, and named a magistrate, and named a landlord, and named a series of small grievances that had, in the specific way of small grievances, the shape of a much larger one behind them, and Inez, seated in her corner, went very still. The Duke, who was standing by the fire, saw her go still. He did not know what the stillness meant. He resolved to find out. He did not ask her that night. He asked her instead 3 days later, in the library in the window seat, when she had come to return one book and take another, and he asked her not directly, but by way of a mild question about the roads in the south of the county, and she answered him not directly either, but by way of a mild question about whether he had ever had cause to look into the accounts of a certain small charitable trust that had been set up in the last century for the benefit of the widows of a certain regiment. He looked at her. He said that he had not. She said that it was, on the whole, an interesting piece of work, and that anyone who read the accounts from a distance of 11 months, in the small hours, by not enough candle, might find that the arithmetic did not, in the strictest sense, add up. He said, very slowly, that this was a remarkable thing to say. She said that she was aware. She said that she had not intended to say it. She said that she had come here to not say it. She said that she did not know why she had said it now, except that he had asked her about the roads, and the roads and the trust were, in her opinion, the same matter, and she had been carrying the matter alone for a long time, and he had, for reasons she did not understand, made it briefly possible to set it down. He did not touch her hand. He did not move at all. He said, after a moment, that she should not carry it alone any longer. She said that she did not know how to give it up, because giving it up was the same as trusting someone, and she had not, in her experience, found many people to whom the thing could be trusted. He said that he understood. He said that he did not ask her to trust him yet. He said only that if she chose to, in her own time, at her own pace, he would meet her at whatever pace she chose. She looked at him. She did not answer. She rose. She said that she would think about it. She left the library. The hound went with her as far as the door, and then, at the low word she did not know he used, came back and sat at his feet. He looked down at the animal. He said quietly that he had never in his life had less of a plan. The hound, in sympathy, did not disagree. The visitor from the city, who was the reason for the screen, presented his business over 3 days in the study, and the Duke did what was required of him in the study, and did it well, and did not think, in the study, about the woman in the library or the ledger she had hinted at. He was very good at compartments. He had been trained in them since he could stand. On the 3rd night of the visitor's stay, however, at a supper the visitor could not attend because he had been summoned home, Inez came into the small dining room with Lady Helbrook and sat in her corner and ate what was put in front of her, and, on rising with the ladies afterwards, dropped, without seeming to, a folded slip of paper on the floor beside the Duke's chair as she passed. He picked it up. He did not open it in the room. He opened it in the study, after the household had gone up. It was a list. It was, in her small, precise hand, a list of figures, drawn from memory, that reproduced with unnerving accuracy the accounts of the charitable trust for the widows of the regiment for the last 4 years, together with a shorter list, in the same hand, of the discrepancies she had noticed, and a shorter list still, of the names of the persons who had, in her judgment, been responsible for the discrepancies. 2 of the names he knew personally. One of them was a magistrate. One of them was a landlord. One of them was, more distantly, a cousin of his own on his mother's side. He read the list twice. He set it down. He crossed to the window. He stood for a long time looking out at the silver courtyard. He thought about the shape of the thing she had put into his hands. He thought about what it had cost her to write it. He thought about the fact that she had written it in memory, without notes, because notes could be found and memory could not, and about the fact that she had chosen, at last, to trust him. He was aware, with a clarity that surprised him, that if he mishandled the next hour, he would lose something he had not known he had. He did not mishandle it. He went, in the morning, to the library, and he found her there in the window seat, and he sat down at the other end of it, and he said quietly that he had read her list. She said that she knew he had. He said that he would act on it. He said what he would do. He names the persons he would speak to, and the order in which he would speak to them, and the protections he would put around her before he spoke to any of them, and the arrangements he had already made that morning before she came down to have her ledger, when she chose to give it to him, copied by a clerk who owed him a very old debt and who would ask no questions. She listened. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. She said, at length, that she had not expected to be believed. He said that he had noticed. She said that she did not, in general, expect to be believed. He said that he had noticed that too. She looked at him. Her eyes were the color of weak tea and had, at the corners, the faint, tired lines of a person who had read too late by not enough candle. And something in her face broke, quietly, as a small piece of ice breaks in a glass in a warm room. And she looked away, and she did not, in the strictest reading, cry, because she was not, in her own accounting, a person who did that. But the room was very still for a while, and the hound, who had been lying between them, put its great gray head on her knee, and she rested her hand on it, and the Duke, on the other end of the window seat, did not move. He did not need to. He had learned, at last, that the moment you stepped into a scene, you changed it, and that sometimes the thing you wanted most to protect was the version of the scene that existed without you in it. There was a supper on the last night of the fortnight, and there was a great deal of laughter at it, and Lady Helbrook was in fine form, and the Marquis's sister played the pianoforte with rather more accuracy than before, and the deaf gentleman fell asleep in his chair, and Inez sat in her corner and watched, and was watched, in the small, deliberate way she had come to understand from the head of the table. After the ladies withdrew, and after the gentlemen came in, and after the room had begun its slow thinning, the Duke crossed the drawing-room and stopped in front of Lady Helbrook, and bowed, and asked whether he might have a private word with her the following morning before the coaches were called, on a matter concerning her companion. Lady Helbrook looked at him. Lady Helbrook was 72, and had the face of a woman who had once been beautiful, and had decided, on the whole, that the trade of beauty for opinions had been a good one, and she had not, in her long life, been often surprised. She was not surprised now. She said that he might. She said, also, that she had wondered when he would get around to it, and that she had begun to suspect he was slower than his reputation. He said, gravely, that he had been slower than his reputation, and that he apologized. She said that she would consider whether to forgive him after she had heard what he had to say. She said this with a small alteration at the corner of the mouth that Inez had inherited, in a manner of speaking, from 3 years of watching her, and which Inez, across the room, saw and understood, and which made her look down at her hands very quickly, because a person did not, in her experience, permit herself to be moved in a public drawing-room. In the morning, in Lady Helbrook's sitting-room, the Duke said what he had come to say. He said it plainly. He said that he had, in the course of the fortnight, come to know Lady Halbrook's companion and had come to hold her in a regard he had not expected to feel for anyone in his life, and that he understood, and would not attempt to conceal, that the difference in their situations was not a small one, and that he would not, on any account, ask Miss Farrow to do a thing she did not wish to do. He said that he had come to Lady Halbrook first because Lady Halbrook had stood, in the absence of any other, in the place of family to Miss Farrow, and because he had been raised to believe that a man who was serious went first to the person who had cared. Lady Halbrook heard him out. Lady Halbrook, at the end of it, said that she had known Inez for 3 years, and that in those 3 years she had watched her carry a great many things in a great many silences, and that if the Duke was proposing to relieve her of any of those silences, he had Lady Halbrook's approval, provided Inez wished it, and provided he understood that Inez was not, on any account, to be relieved of the ones she did not wish to give up. He said that he understood. He said that this was, in fact, the only condition on which he had come. Lady Halbrook, at that, permitted herself a smile, which was rare, and dismissed him. Later, in the library, in the window seat, he said what he had come to say to Inez, and he did not say it in the elaborate way he had rehearsed. He said it, at length, in 3 sentences. He said that he did not wish her to leave. He said that he did not know, yet, in what capacity he was asking her to stay, only that any capacity she chose would be the right one. He said that he would wait. She did not answer at once. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she looked down at the hound, which had put its great gray head on her knee, and she rested her hand on the flat plate of its skull, and she said quietly that she had come here to not be noticed. He said that he knew. She said that she was, on the whole, glad that she had failed. She said this in the small, precise voice she used for numbers, without embellishment, and it broke quietly, as the room went on being very still, and outside the window the light on the west lawn was the particular clean light of a late morning after rain, and somewhere in the house below a clock struck the hour, and she counted the strikes without meaning to, and there were 11. They did not marry that year, and they did not marry the next, because Inez had said, quietly, that she wished first to see the matter of the charitable trust brought to a conclusion, since it was, in her mind, a debt she owed to the widows, and she did not wish to enter another life while an old one was still open. And the Duke, who understood debts and open matters and the small, quiet vanity of finishing what one had started, agreed. The matter of the trust was brought to a conclusion, in the end, over 18 months, with a great deal of correspondence and a small number of quiet interviews, and one long, unpleasant afternoon in a magistrate's parlor, in which the magistrate, who had been named on Inez's list, said several things he later wished he had not, and was, in due course, replaced. The landlord, likewise named, was persuaded to retire to a small property in the north on grounds of health, and did, in fact, become ill shortly afterwards, though the illness was thought by those close to him to be more of the temper than of the body. The Duke's cousin on his mother's side, who was the third name, was dealt with within the family, in the way such families dealt with such things, which is to say, quietly, thoroughly, and with a lasting reduction in his allowance. The widows of the regiment received, at last, the sums they had been owed for a long time, and received them with the usual mixture of relief and suspicion that people who have been cheated for many years show when the cheating stops. Lady Halbrook, who lived to see all of this, took a considerable pleasure in it, and told the story of the magistrate at every dinner she was invited to for the rest of her life, in a version that grew more detailed with each telling, and in which she herself played, by the end, a significantly larger part than the record would have supported. She died in her sleep in her small, damp town, at the age of 78, with a book on her chest and a cat on her feet. And she left to Inez her small collection of shawls, her large collection of opinions, and a letter that Inez read once and did not read again, and kept in the drawer that locked. The deaf gentleman from the dinner in the great house, who had been at the edge of the story throughout and had not at any point understood it, lived on for many years in a state of contented deafness and died on a Thursday, having spent the morning correcting a nephew about the road from the south. The Marquess's sister, who had played the pianoforte with more feeling than accuracy, married a man who was tone-deaf, which was, in the end, kinder to them both than anyone had expected. The child from the village, who had pulled the thorn from the hound's paw, grew up and became, in the course of time, the village's schoolmistress, and kept on her desk a small carved wooden dog that she said had been given to her by a great lady, and did not, when asked, explain further. The hound, whose name in the household ledgers was Bran, and whose name in the mouths of the servants was, by the end, spoken with cheerful ease, lived 9 more years, which was longer than anyone had thought it would, and spent the last 3 of them almost entirely at Inez's feet in the library window seat, and died there one afternoon in the middle of a sentence she was reading aloud, and she finished the sentence, quietly, before she closed the book. The Duke and Inez married in the small chapel on the estate on a morning in early spring, with only a few people present, and Inez wore a dress the color of weak tea, at her own insistence, because she said that she had spent enough of her life in gray and was ready to try something else. And the Duke, who had never in his life laughed in a chapel, laughed once at that, quietly, into her shoulder. They had 2 children, a girl who read too late by not enough candle, and a boy who could calm any animal that was put in front of him, and neither of these facts was, on reflection, a surprise. In the courtyard of the great house, on winter evenings, when the light on the stones was the particular silver of a thin moon, the Duke would sometimes stand at the window of his study and look down at the place where he had, once, seen a small woman in a traveling cloak kneeling in the gravel, and he would think, without saying it, that he had lived a long time in that house before he had known what it was for. He did not say this to her. He did not need to. She knew. If you have ever been the person who carried a thing alone for longer than you should have, who kept a small ledger of it in the bottom of a trunk, who moved through rooms hoping not to be noticed because you had learned that being noticed cost more than being invisible, and who found, at last, in a place you did not expect, one creature who chose you without being asked, and then, through the doorway that creature opened, one person who saw you and did not look away, then this story has been, in a manner of speaking, about you. Tell me, if you would, which moment stayed with you as you listened? Was it the tail moving in its uncertain new rhythm on the wet stones of the courtyard, as if the mussel had been asked to remember a word in a language it had forgotten? Was it the hound lying across the threshold of the small room above the kitchens, refusing to be sent away? Was it the folded slip of paper, dropped without seeming to, beside a chair? Was it the dress the color of weak tea in the chapel in early spring? Sit a little longer by the fire if you can. There is more wood in the basket, and the night is not yet over, and there is another story waiting on the other side of the quiet. About another person who was not seen for a long time and was, at last, seen. And I would be glad of your company when I tell it. Draw the blanket up. Rest your hands. The kettle is on. When you are ready, we will begin again.